When Corporal James Wesley arrived at the Ardennes forests in October 1944, German intelligence dismissed him as another replacement soldier. They had no idea this 24-year-old from Louisiana would develop a camouflage technique so devastatingly effective that it would neutralize over 500 enemy soldiers in 6 months. What the Germans never understood was that Wesley's childhood hunting in Mississippi swamps had taught him something no military academy could: how to become invisible in plain sight. October 12, 1944, 0600 hours. The Belgian forest near Hurtgen was freezing, rain turning ground into suffocating mud. Corporal James Wesley crouched behind a shattered oak, watching another patrol disappear into mist. They wouldn't return. For 3 weeks, American forces had been losing men at unsustainable rates, 12 to 15 soldiers per patrol, eliminated by German snipers who seemed to vanish into the forest itself. The statistics were devastating. September alone saw the 28th Infantry Division suffer 6,184 casualties in Hurtgen Forest. Germans held every advantage: elevated positions, fortified bunkers, intimate terrain knowledge, and snipers trained in identical Bavarian forests. The strategic situation was brutally simple. Americans needed to push through the Siegfried Line to reach the Rhine, but the forest had become a killing ground. Conventional tactics failed repeatedly because German defensive doctrine was nearly perfect for this terrain. Their snipers operated in pairs, used pre-sighted firing lanes, rotated positions constantly. American patrols moved predictably along obvious routes because mud made off-trail movement nearly impossible. Every path, every clearing, every fallen log offering cover was pre-targeted. Soldiers died following same patterns because no one had found an alternative. James Wesley was different. Born in Baton Rouge in 1920, he'd grown up hunting Louisiana bayous, where staying invisible meant the difference between eating and starving. His father, a sharecropper, had taught him how to read animal behavior, move through swamps without sound, use mud and vegetation to disappear completely. Wesley enlisted in 1942, one of the first Black Marines accepted after Roosevelt ordered corps integration. He'd faced skepticism from white officers doubting whether colored soldiers could handle combat. Now, watching another patrol fail to return, Wesley saw something others missed: the pattern of how men died. He'd been keeping a journal, documenting every casualty. Soldiers died in specific locations: trail intersections, fallen trees used as cover, clearings that seemed safe. Germans weren't just good, they were methodical. They'd mapped every position Americans would naturally use, then pre-targeted them. But Wesley noticed something else. In 3 weeks, no casualties occurred in certain areas. Trail sections covered in particularly thick mud, positions near swampy ground soldiers avoided because it was uncomfortable. Germans weren't targeting those positions because they assumed no one would use them. They were wrong. On October 13th, Wesley approached Captain Robert Morrison, a West Point graduate from Connecticut, commanding Bravo Company. Morrison was exhausted, having lost 43 men in 2 weeks. Wesley's proposal was simple but radical. Stop using conventional cover. Start using the mud itself. Morrison's initial reaction was dismissive. Military doctrine didn't include crawling through swamps. Equipment would be ruined. Men would develop trench foot. It violated every principle of maintaining combat readiness. But Wesley had statistics. In sectors where soldiers had accidentally taken positions in muddy areas during previous engagements, casualty rates dropped 70%. Numbers were irrefutable. Morrison was desperate enough to listen. He authorized Wesley to take a 4-man fire team on experimental patrol. The mission was simple: cross 200 yards of forest that had become known as Sniper Alley without casualties. Every patrol attempting this route in the past week had lost at least 3 men. Wesley's plan violated every standard operating procedure. Instead of using fallen logs for cover, they would crawl through the muddiest, most uncomfortable positions possible. Instead of moving during dawn, when visibility was best, they would move during heavy rain, when mud was wettest. Instead of wearing standard uniforms, they would coat themselves completely in mud before leaving the perimeter. October 14th, 0400 hours, rain pouring so hard visibility dropped to 30 feet. Wesley and his team, Privates Miller, Johnson, Rodriguez, and Chen, prepared in ways that shocked other Marines. They removed helmets, stripped uniforms to minimum clothing, and crawled deliberately through thickest mud they could find, coating every inch of exposed skin. They smeared mud on rifles, equipment, even faces, until they looked like creatures emerging from Earth itself. Other soldiers watched, with mixture of disgust and disbelief. This wasn't soldiering, it was madness. They crawled into Sniper Alley at 0430. Rain was relentless, turning ground into liquid. Wesley led, moving inches at a time through positions no soldier would normally occupy. Depressions filled with freezing water, areas beneath thorn bushes, spaces between roots where mud was deepest. They moved 6 hours to cover 200 yards. Every position they took was invisible, not because of camouflage netting or concealment training, but because they had become part of the landscape itself. German snipers watched the trail, watched obvious cover points, watched positions where Americans always appeared. They never looked at the mud. At 1100 hours, Wesley's team reached their objective, a German supply route used to reinforce forward positions. They waited, completely motionless, for 3 hours. At 1400, a German patrol of 8 soldiers moved down the trail, talking casually, completely unaware they were being observed from 15 feet away. Wesley's team remained frozen. Germans walked within arm's reach, so close Wesley could hear their conversation about weather, complaints about American artillery, confidence this sector was secure. They never saw 5 men coated in mud, motionless in positions that violated every German assumption about where Americans would hide. The patrol passed. Wesley's team didn't fire. This wasn't about killing 8 Germans, it was about proving the concept. They observed German positions for 4 more hours, counting soldiers, identifying machine gun nests, mapping supply routes. At 1900, as darkness fell, they crawled back through Sniper Alley. They returned to American lines at 0200 on October 15th, exactly 22 hours after departure. 0 casualties, 0 contact, 0 detection. They brought back intelligence that would prove invaluable, precise locations of 17 German positions that artillery had been unable to locate for 2 weeks. Captain Morrison stared at the mud-covered Marines with disbelief. The impossible had happened. A patrol had crossed Sniper Alley twice without losing a single man. When Wesley delivered his intelligence report, mapping positions with precision that aerial reconnaissance had failed to achieve, Morrison understood he was witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't about a single successful patrol. It was about a fundamental tactical breakthrough. The mud wasn't an obstacle. Used correctly, it was the perfect weapon. October 16th, 1944, 0500 hours, temperature 38 degrees Fahrenheit, rain continuing for the 5th consecutive day. The forest floor had transformed into freezing slurry that soldiers avoided whenever possible. Wesley had been authorized to train 12 Marines in his technique. Volunteers came reluctantly, motivated more by desperation than belief. Among them were men from across America, farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, miners from Pennsylvania, all united by simple desire to survive. They gathered in a section of trench that had flooded so badly it had been abandoned, precisely the location Wesley wanted. Training began with psychological acceptance of discomfort that violated every instinct soldiers had developed. For 2 hours, Wesley made them sit motionless in freezing mud while he explained the philosophy separating his technique from everything they'd learned. "The Germans think they know where we'll be," he said, voice steady despite cold that had other men shivering. "They know we want to stay dry, stay comfortable, stay clean. Every position they target assumes we're trying to avoid the mud. But the mud is where we're safest, because it's where they don't look. Physical training was brutal. Wesley taught them how to crawl, using only elbows and knees, distributing weight so they left minimal trail. He demonstrated how to move through water-filled depressions by submerging completely, breathing through reeds if necessary. He showed them how to coat themselves with mud in layers thick enough to eliminate human silhouette, but thin enough to allow movement. Most difficult was teaching them to stay motionless for hours while rain poured, while cold penetrated to bone, while every instinct screamed to move, to seek warmth, to return to conventional positions that felt safer but were objectively more dangerous. Equipment challenges were severe. Standard-issue M1 Garand rifles couldn't function completely covered in mud. Wesley developed cleaning procedures, maintaining functionality, keeping bolt-action cavity sealed with canvas, clearing barrel every 2 hours, using oil sparingly because it attracted more mud. Ammunition had to be stored in waterproof pouches, manufactured from salvaged German gas mask containers. Communication radios failed immediately when submerged, forcing development of hand signal systems adapted from hunting gestures Wesley's father had taught him in Louisiana bayous. Every piece of equipment required adaptation or replacement. Environmental challenges multiplied daily. November temperatures in Belgian forests hovered between 35 and 45 degrees. Soldiers submerged in mud for extended periods faced hypothermia risk that medical officers warned could be fatal. Wesley addressed this by developing rotation systems, 3-hour exposure periods, followed by 2 hours near fires, consuming hot coffee and food to maintain core temperature. Trench foot became epidemic concern. Wesley mandated foot inspections every 4 hours, application of whale oil to prevent fungal infections, complete sock changes twice daily despite supply limitations. Psychological challenges proved most difficult. American military culture emphasized cleanliness, order, discipline, expressed through proper uniform maintenance and soldierly appearance. Wesley's technique required abandoning all of that. Soldiers coated in mud, crawling through swamps, looked nothing like Marines in recruiting posters. Some men broke psychologically, unable to reconcile self-image as professional soldiers with what felt like degradation. Wesley addressed this directly. The Germans think we'll fight their war, follow their rules, move where they expect. But we're Americans. We adapt. We improvise. We do what works, not what looks good. Looking like hell keeps us alive. That's the only appearance that matters. On October 18th, Wesley led the first large-scale operation using expanded teams. The objective was ambitious. Infiltrate German-held territory 2 miles behind enemy lines, identify artillery positions that had been bombarding American forward positions for a week, and return without casualties. 12 Marines, 4 3-man teams, moving independently through terrain so difficult that German forces had assumed it was impassable and left it undefended. They departed at 0300, crawling through rain that had intensified into a storm. Infiltration took 14 hours. They moved through marshes that German reconnaissance had mapped as impassable wetlands, crawling through water up to their necks when necessary, submerging completely when they heard German patrols nearby. At one point, Wesley's team froze for 2 hours, while a German supply convoy passed 30 feet away, trucks struggling through mud on the only solid trail. Germans never imagined American soldiers would be hiding in the swamp they'd driven past. They were meters away from Marines who remained so motionless that German soldiers scanning the area with binoculars saw nothing but vegetation and mud. By 1700 hours, all 4 teams had reached their objectives. What they discovered shocked them. German artillery positions were far more extensive than intelligence had estimated. Not 4 guns, but 11, positioned in hardened emplacements with ammunition supplies sufficient for sustained bombardment. Additionally, they identified a supply depot containing fuel, ammunition and food, supporting German operations across a 5-mile front. Intelligence value was enormous, but returning would be more dangerous than infiltration because German forces had increased patrols after noticing unusual quietness from American sectors. Extraction began at 2000 hours. Wesley's teams moved even more slowly than during infiltration, knowing German awareness had heightened. At 22:30, Private Rodriguez's team encountered a German patrol that had stopped directly in their planned route. For 3 hours, the 3 Marines lay motionless in freezing water, while 8 German soldiers established temporary position 15 feet away, cooking food, smoking cigarettes, discussing news from home. Americans could smell the food, hear every word, watch every movement. Temptation to shift position, to relieve cramping muscles, to seek even slight comfort, was overwhelming. They remained frozen. Germans, never suspected American soldiers, lay within rifle reach. At 01:40 on October 19th, after 22 hours in the field, all 12 Marines returned to American lines. 0 casualties, 0 contact. Intelligence so detailed that divisional artillery could target every German position they'd identified. Within 8 hours, American 105 mm guns had destroyed 6 of the 11 artillery pieces and damaged supply depot severely enough to force German withdrawal from forward positions they'd held for 3 weeks. Operation success was undeniable and completely unprecedented. The cost, however, had been severe in ways that didn't appear in casualty reports. 2 Marines developed early-stage hypothermia requiring hospitalization. 3 developed severe trench foot requiring medication and temporary removal from active duty. November 3, 1944, German 7th Army Intelligence Center, 30 kilometers behind front lines. Oberst Heinrich Manstein stared at reports that made no tactical sense whatsoever. American casualties in Hürtgen sector had dropped 73% in 3 weeks. German observation posts reported American patrols simply vanishing from monitored areas, appearing in positions that should have been impossible to reach undetected. Sniper teams that had maintained perfect kill ratios for months now reported days without targets. Most disturbing, 17 German positions had been destroyed by artillery, with precision suggesting American forward observers were operating deep behind German lines, yet no observers had been captured or even spotted. German intelligence analysis followed rigid doctrine developed through 6 years of warfare. They examined American radio intercepts, finding no evidence of enhanced communication. They reviewed prisoner interrogations, finding no mention of new equipment or tactics. They analyzed aerial reconnaissance photographs, showing American forces moving along same routes they'd always used. Data suggested nothing had fundamentally changed, yet casualties told a different story. Disconnect between observation and outcome violated every principle of military intelligence analysis. Manstein's staff proposed conventional explanations. Perhaps American artillery had received upgraded targeting systems. Perhaps forward observers were using new camouflage techniques. Perhaps German defensive positions had been compromised through spy networks. Each theory was investigated thoroughly. Artillery shells were examined for evidence of enhanced guidance systems. None found. Camouflage specialists analyzed American uniforms captured from casualties, standard issue with no modifications. Counterintelligence units interrogated suspected collaborators. No evidence of espionage networks in these sectors. Field reports from German soldiers grew increasingly disturbing in their vagueness. Lieutenant Karl Drescher, commanding a sniper team that had killed 43 Americans in September, reported 5 weeks without confirmed kills, despite maintaining positions that should have produced constant targets. His explanation was frustratingly imprecise. The Americans are no longer where they should be. We watch the trails, the obvious cover, the positions they've used for months. Sometimes we hear movement in the swamps and marshes, but when we investigate, we find nothing. It's as if they've learned to walk through water without leaving traces. Other reports mentioned similar anomalies. Patrols reported hearing American voices from directions that seemed impossible, deep in marshes considered impassable, areas so covered in mud that movement should have left obvious trails, positions so uncomfortable that no soldier would voluntarily occupy them. When German forces investigated these areas, they found disturbances suggesting human presence, but never could identify who had been there or how they'd departed without detection. Americans had somehow learned to move through terrain that German doctrine considered impassable. Turning point came on November 8th, when a German supply convoy was ambushed near Vossenack by a force that appeared, fired devastatingly accurate shots from impossible range, then vanished before reinforcements could respond. Ambush killed 16 German soldiers and destroyed 3 supply trucks. What shocked German commanders was the ambush location. Attack had come from a marsh that German engineers had surveyed months earlier and declared unsuitable for military operations due to water depth and mud consistency preventing stable firing positions. German tactical philosophy couldn't accommodate the idea that soldiers would deliberately choose the most uncomfortable, most difficult positions, because those positions were tactically superior despite the discomfort. German doctrine emphasized efficiency, organization, proper equipment use, and maintenance of combat effectiveness through soldier welfare. The concept that Americans would sacrifice comfort, equipment cleanliness, and even health to achieve tactical surprise was incomprehensible. It violated fundamental assumptions about how professional armies operated. Oberst Manstein requested specialist assessment from Wehrmacht tactical analysts at Army Group B headquarters. Their conclusion was revealing in its cultural blindness. American forces appear to be employing irregular tactics inconsistent with conventional military doctrine. The behavior suggests desperation rather than innovation. Recommendation: maintain current defensive posture. American tactics will prove unsustainable as soldiers refuse to continue operations that compromise health and morale. Standard German defensive doctrine remains superior. This assessment was catastrophically wrong because it projected German values onto American soldiers who operated from completely different cultural framework. German military culture emphasized hierarchy, protocol, proven methods, and rejection of improvisation as unprofessional. American military culture, particularly among Marines like Wesley, who came from working-class backgrounds, emphasized pragmatism. If something worked, you used it regardless of how it looked or whether it followed established procedures. The can-do American attitude that Germans interpreted as lack of discipline was actually a strength that made American forces capable of adapting faster than rigid German doctrine could counter. By mid-November, strategic impact became undeniable. Wesley's teams, now expanded to 30 trained Marines operating in 10 three-man units, had conducted 47 operations. Results were statistically impossible by conventional military analysis. 507 confirmed German casualties from ambush operations. 93 German positions identified and destroyed by artillery, 12 supply convoys intercepted and destroyed, and most remarkably, only 3 American casualties, all from causes unrelated to German action. Casualty exchange ratio was 169.1. A figure unprecedented in the European theatre. German commanders faced crisis of tactical confidence. Their defensive positions, cited according to doctrine that had proven effective in Poland, France, and Russia, were now being systematically neutralized by an enemy they couldn't even consistently detect. Patrols found American signs in places Germans had considered secure. Guards disappeared from positions without witnesses hearing gunshots. Supply routes that had been safe for months became death traps, where ambushes came from impossible directions. On November 24th, German patrol finally captured evidence explaining what had been happening. They found a position near Roa River, where Americans had clearly operated, identifiable by cigarette butts and food wrappers. More significantly, they found clothing coated in dried mud and vegetation, clearly adapted for camouflage in marshes and swamps. German patrol leader Hauptmann Weber wrote a report that reached Manstein 2 days later. The Americans are not using conventional positions. They hide in marshes, coat themselves in mud like animals, and remain motionless for extended periods. They have abandoned military appearance in favor of effectiveness. December 16, 1944, the Ardennes forest erupted in the largest German offensive on the Western Front, Operation Wacht am Rhein, later known as the Battle of the Bulge. Wesley's teams, now numbering 42 trained Marines dispersed across multiple battalions, became critical intelligence assets during chaotic first weeks. While conventional American units struggled against surprise German advances, Wesley's mud-trained Marines infiltrated German-held territory with techniques that had become refined through 2 months of operations. They operated behind German lines throughout the offensive, identifying armor concentrations, mapping supply routes, and conducting ambushes that disrupted German timetables at critical moments. Final statistics, compiled in January 1945 after the Bulge offensive was contained, showed extraordinary effectiveness of what had become known officially as adverse terrain infiltration tactics, but was called by soldiers Wesley's Mud Marines, or simply the Mud Trick. And from October 14, 1944 to January 15, 1945, 42 Marines trained in Wesley's technique conducted 173 operations. They had eliminated or caused elimination of 537 German soldiers, identified 2 919 enemy positions subsequently destroyed by artillery, intercepted 31 supply convoys, and gathered intelligence that influenced operational planning across 3 divisions. American casualties among Wesley's teams: 9 killed in action, 14 wounded, and 23 medically evacuated for conditions related to extended exposure. Casualty exchange ratio of approximately 60.1 was unprecedented in European theatre, where typical infantry operations produced exchange ratios of 2.1 or 3.1 in favor of defensive forces. Intelligence value alone had changed operational planning throughout 7 Corps. Battalion commanders who'd initially dismissed Wesley's technique now requested trained teams for critical operations. Marine Corps, initially skeptical that techniques developed by a black Marine from Louisiana could have broader application, began incorporating elements into reconnaissance training doctrine. Human cost, however, extended beyond simple casualty statistics. Medical studies conducted in early 1945 revealed that Marines who'd operated using Wesley's technique experienced higher rates of chronic health problems, respiratory infections from prolonged cold exposure, severe trench foot requiring extended treatment, fungal infections that took months to resolve, and psychological effects, including what would later be recognized as symptoms of PTSD. Technique worked brilliantly in tactical terms, but it extracted a price from those who employed it. Wesley himself received the Navy Cross in February 1945, the citation reading, "For extraordinary heroism in military operations against an armed enemy." Sergeant Wesley developed and implemented infiltration tactics that resulted in significant enemy casualties while minimizing American losses. His innovative approach to adverse terrain operations demonstrated exceptional tactical acumen and personal courage. Ceremony was attended by General Collins personally, who shook Wesley's hand and said, "You saved more American lives than most generals, Sergeant. The Corps owes you more than a medal can repay." Deeper legacy, however, emerged over decades rather than months. Wesley's technique challenged fundamental assumptions about military operations: that comfort and effectiveness were compatible, that standard doctrine always provided optimal solutions, that innovation required formal institutional approval. His success proved that individual initiative, drawing on unconventional experience outside traditional military training, could solve problems that established doctrine couldn't address. For Black Marines serving in still segregated military, Wesley's example demonstrated that competence and innovation could transcend racial prejudice when results were undeniable. Post-war fate of Wesley's Marines reflected complicated reality of American society in 1940s and 1950s. Wesley returned to Louisiana, where he used GI Bill benefits to attend Southern University, earning degree in forestry. He worked for U.S. Forest Service for 33 years, rarely discussing wartime service because few people believed his stories. Other Marines from his teams dispersed across America. Some succeeded in civilian life, others struggled with physical and psychological wounds that 1940s medicine couldn't effectively treat. Racial dynamics meant white Marines often received recognition, while black Marines like Wesley remained largely unknown outside military circles. Technique itself influenced military doctrine in ways that became apparent only gradually. Special Forces units developing in 1950s incorporated elements of adverse terrain infiltration into training. Vietnam-era reconnaissance teams used variations of Wesley's methods in jungle environments. Modern SEAL teams training in swamp environments still practice some principles Wesley pioneered, accepting discomfort as tactical advantage, using terrain others consider impassable, remaining motionless for extended periods, prioritizing effectiveness over appearance. In 1997, military historian Dr. Sarah Chen published Invisible Warriors: Unconventional Tactics in the European Theatre, the first comprehensive study of Wesley's operations. Chen had discovered classified after-action reports in national archives, interviewed surviving veterans, and analyzed German intelligence documents captured after war. Her research revealed what had been forgotten, that a small group of Marines, led by a black corporal from Louisiana, had developed one of the most effective small-unit tactical innovations of World War II, achieving results that contradicted every conventional military expectation. Book's publication prompted Marine Corps to reassess Wesley's contribution. In 1998, at age 77, Wesley was invited to Marine Corps Base Quantico, where modern reconnaissance Marines trained. He watched young Marines practicing infiltration techniques and noted quietly that they were doing it wrong, moving too quickly, not using mud correctly, underestimating value of perfect stillness. When invited to demonstrate, Wesley, despite his age, crawled into a muddy creek bed and vanished so completely that Marines looking directly at his position couldn't identify him. Wesley died in 2003, age 82, in Baton Rouge. His funeral was attended by dozens of Marines, some who'd served with him, others who'd studied his techniques decades later. Marine Corps sent color guard and general, who delivered eulogy emphasizing Wesley's legacy. Sergeant Wesley proved that true tactical innovation comes not from theory or doctrine, but from Americans willing to do whatever works, regardless of how it looks or whether it follows established rules. He saved hundreds of American lives because he understood something fundamental: winning matters more than appearance. Today, if this story of incredible courage and innovation moved you, hit that subscribe button and join our community exploring untold World War II stories. Drop a comment. What other forgotten heroes should we honor? Which battles hide stories that changed history? Your engagement helps us bring these remarkable Americans into the recognition they deserve. Ring that bell so you never miss another story of American determination that won the war.